The spinner is spinning, and we are live. Great. Well, welcome to our Nobody Culture podcast, or as they call it, the NoPody cast. I can't quite bring myself to say that with a straight face, but the whole point of this is to introduce people to Nobody Studios, some aspects of our culture, some aspects of the work that we're doing. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Zack and Jeremy. I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment. I'm Donald Farmer. I run research and innovation at the studio. And so one of my jobs is to develop innovation strategy within the studio context, to do fundamental research in the areas that the studio is interested in. So technical areas and business areas, and to bring all that together and to find the intersections of business areas and social developments that we're interested in with technologies. And then at these intersections, start to kind of move into the ideation lab process and discover how new companies can be formed from that. And another way in which we can find new ideas within the studio, of course, is by finding companies who are developing outside, or finding people who've got fantastic ideas outside and bringing them into the studio. And two of the first people we brought into the studio were Zack and Jeremy, and we're extremely excited to have them on board. And I would like them to introduce themselves and give some background. Maybe Zack, you'd like to start. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are, what you do, and a bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. So I'm here in Tel Aviv, and really happy to have joined the studio just a couple of months back with Jeremy. And I've been working in the blockchain space now for a few years alongside Jeremy. We kind of rabbit holed together down the blockchain tunnel, and we were kind of ideating on some startup concepts when we were introduced to the studio. We built out a blockchain-based rewards and loyalty program startup that we then kind of brought to the studio and started discussing not just what blockchain can do for consumer, but also a range of different applications. And the studio kind of became really excited in the potential for blockchain to be one of the fundamental technologies that NewCos are built on. So that conversation developed into bringing us into the studio, and we're now working on some blockchain-based NewCos for the studio. My role is the VP of blockchain technology, so alongside building companies and kind of being in that sort of role, I'm also across wherever blockchain might end up touching the studio. There's different concepts where blockchain might get brought up as whether it's relevant or not, and so it's great to kind of be across a wider range of activities going on. And blockchain is an exciting space, not just from a technological standpoint, but from even a regulatory standpoint. Not often you can say that about the area that you work in tech, but things are changing and will continue to do so. So it's great to be on the cutting edge and across what's going to be coming next. So my background wasn't always tech. I came from a world of politics and media primarily, back quite a while now, but I have that in common as well with Jeremy, who can introduce himself. But I think balancing like a tech and a non-tech side is always proves useful in innovation and ideating. Bringing different experiences into company building has always proven really useful. And I don't know, Donald, if you've ever pursued a knitting company yet, a knitting startup, but if you were to, then that would be the reason. Like the real proof of pudding. But
I mean, I started in archaeology and history, and I've done all sorts of things. Tech almost feels like a sideline sometimes, even though it's actually the critical component of my career. Jeremy, exactly. What about you? Can you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us some things about what you're doing?
I'm Jeremy Shankle. I came into the studio with Zack. We've been working together for a couple of years, and it's interesting because a lot of the Nobody culture is that we're distributed, and me and Zack have I don't know if Zach wants me to say this, but we've actually never met in real life. So
Really?
we,
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah, that's good. That's
we
the
were
headline.
both, yeah, we were both living in New York. I was kind of near my parents in New Hampshire when we were introduced. But then we both since moved. I'm living in Berlin now, and him in Tel Aviv, and it's been an interesting journey. We're working together on some other things, and blockchain sort of came into it. My background as well is, I guess I went to school for other things. I have degrees in political science and community development. But I had my first sort of official startup in high school, and was always interested in tech, and it was always part of what I did, and sort of slowly became the full-time job, as happens to a lot of people. So I've worked in enterprise and startups, consulting, etc. And I think for me, what's really interesting, I'm also a VP of distributed tech here at the studios, and I think what's interesting to me about the way we're working is I love that we have this opportunity to kind of interface with people who are building different kinds of startups, have different ideas, because I feel like so back when I was in high school, that was the 90s. So I was sort of Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. I've been, my first computer was like a Tandy 1000. That was, breaking with basic when I was a kid, right? So I feel like that the tech keeps changing, and what's interesting is this kind of idea that we can build using different tech and different ideas to sort of within the studio to, as things sort of shift. I guess that's what's sort of fun about it.
Well, I would love to dig in a little bit more to the technology, but first of all, I got to say, every day my ambition is to learn something new and surprising, and learning that you guys haven't actually met is news to me, and and surprising, and actually delightful as well, in a way that because I certainly couldn't tell from your interactions and from the work you do that you've never, you've never met each other. I mean, do you even know each other exists? Are you sure that Zach's really Zach? It's like sitting there in the studio in Tel Aviv,
We had a joke.
I'm aware. Yeah, I'm actually aware that I don't exist. Is actually where that goes.
No, I mean, there's a pretty deep philosophy we could get into there. But I think it's fascinating. And, the very fact that you're working on distributed technologies, and that's one of the very important things about blockchain, I think, within the context of the studio and in terms of the way in which we would apply the technology. You're clearly, in a perfect sort of position to talk about that. When we first sort of started speaking with you, one of the projects that you had at the time was a sort of punch card idea. The name of your startup is Punch Cards, and that was like going to a coffee shop. You could get every time you got a coffee, you could get a click on the card. Well, you had a blockchain enabled version of that, as I remember, and except your customer was a taco stand in Tel Aviv. Is that right? Remember that
was
because we have a great.
We were building our entire business around this one
taco stands.
Didn't use any technology.
We have some great taco stands here in the Pacific Northwest, and I went to one locally, and I actually happened to mention to them about this idea, and they said, "Well, what's blockchain? What is it? What does blockchain do for us?" They'd sort of heard the term, but it was actually very difficult explaining to a taco stand food truck why blockchain should be interesting to them. So maybe as a way of describing the technology, that would be a good start. How do you convince a taco stand owner in Tel Aviv or in Seattle that blockchain is for them?
I guess like the best answer that we've discovered through this latest kind of year of trying to build, or cycle of trying to build decentralized applications for mass audiences is that you can't. And the best way to do it is to not tell them it's with blockchain. You just focus on the value add.
Right.
So because we did end up in lots of conversations where you're educating, and if you're educating, you're not selling. So that was definitely one of the lessons that we learned through trying to build a dApp for a mass market application. I would say that it was pretty easy when we focused on the value. It was pretty easy to get those conversations going and moving forward. And and telling somebody that blockchain unlocks the potential for their business to work across a network of different businesses in a way that wouldn't really be possible if you're using closed databases. You don't need to describe the database structure, but the value can be kind of drawn out in the conversation pretty quickly, and that's the only thing that matters. So,
that's
yeah,
cool. That is cool. I mean, I think the fact that the three of us don't have technology backgrounds, maybe we're more receptive to that idea that you don't have to talk about the technology. I mean, very often it's very easy to get deep into technology conversations, but I mean, Jeremy, and your with your kind of different background as well, and bringing that in, do you find it kind of do you find that you can convince people of the value of a project like this without actually having to get into the details of the technology? How would you sell that value to someone?
I think blockchain is really interesting because I started learning about blockchain kind of from the enterprise side to start, and the way banks were using it, and the way sort of commodities firms were thinking about it, rather than kind of from the crypto side. So for me, what was interesting kind of from both a business and a user perspective is that idea of it's really about the ownership. It's really a comparison to like a real world item. So it's much more like having an actual coin that you can take and hand to someone, and then when you hand it to them, they own it. And that's kind of what's amazing about blockchain, is that in a lot of ways it's kind of simple and elegant in that way, which is it's really just you have your account, and it's your sort of hash, your sort of widget on the blockchain that you can then hand to someone else, and then they own it. And there's so much power in that, especially in kind of a permissionless or even in permission environments. There's so much power in the ability to trade your information kind of on your own terms, and you controlling it, I guess, and that's the difference between that and kind of a normal database. And there's other technologies involved too, but I think what's really interesting about the direction this is going is that as people can sort of own that stuff, it just opens up all kinds of possibilities that aren't possible with kind of a closed database system or just APIs. But that's I think the best analogy really is just like having an item that you can just hand to someone, and then when they hand it to them, they own it.
It's very cool. One of the things I said at the beginning was that the research I do in the studio is about business areas that we might be interested in. So we're interested in areas like health and wellness, so we're interested in areas like hospitality, but also social trends that are emerging, and technology trends. And it seems to me that this is one of those examples where, as you were saying, people can be in control of their own data. They can be in control of their ownership of the technology, that this is actually a technology trend which enables a social trend. And therefore that'll be, potentially kind of quite dramatic. And every place I look in the studio where we could be doing things at the intersection of these areas of interest, I think blockchain has potential role to play. I personally feel that, and maybe I'd love to hear your opinion on this, but I personally feel that the whole world of crypto has become somewhat sullied is a wrong word, but it's certainly been some reputational harm to it, because people have seen crypto as an investment vehicle. And frankly, a lot of people have lost a lot of money thinking of crypto as an investment vehicle. But that's only a use case for this technology. Blockchain technology can do a lot more than just that. One of the things, so I wonder if you could maybe speak to, even just in a kind of futuristic way, where you think this technology could play in some products, some services that the studio could provide that people haven't really perhaps thought about yet. Do you have any thoughts going forward, any sort of innovative ideas going forward, without giving away kind of secret IP, but just sort of broad areas that you could think of?
I mean, I think we see it not just blockchain, but sorry, Zach. I just see and not just being blockchain. I see it being about things like IPFS, so distributed kind of web, activity pub. So what's happening with Mastodon, and now Threads is part of that. And so I just it actually reminds me a lot of the old days, like the Web 1 days, where the first website I put together was for the town that my father was working in, and I went and saw the ISP, because it was in some guy's basement. And I think that, like, with AI, so from the futuristic perspective, I think distributed and permissionless starts to make sense with AI, because you need to start proving paper trails. You need to be able to have your AI interact with someone else's AI, and then have a proof of what happened somewhere that can't be altered. So there's like a lot of use cases where, in some ways, I think it starts to enable almost forms of commerce that maybe are old, like almost pre-internet, like almost like an actual market square where, you can send your AI and it can buy something, and then you can kind of see what it did. You like send it to market, it makes a bunch of transactions, it buys, it researches what health and wellness app you should be using, buys it for you, you see the transaction, why it did it, sort of proof, and then you kind of trace it through, sort of thing. So there's like a lot of interesting applications if you start to think of it that way. It's not just human to human interaction.
That's kind of fascinating. I think to some people it might be even a little scary, but I think I can see that being a future. I mean, once we have these agentive experiences with AIs, there's probably no reason why they shouldn't, interact with each other. I could imagine, electric cars, that need service, not only telling you they need service, but also setting up the service arrangement with the car vendor, and then probably booking the appointment, maybe even driving itself to the appointment for all I know. But why can't it just deal with the entire transaction, more or less? It's kind of fascinating. Zach, do you have any particular ideas about how innovation works in the studio when you have ideas like this? I think one of the things we need to be able to do in the studio is move very quickly on ideas, and that requires kind of particular approach to innovation.
Yeah, definitely. Just in response to something you just said just before about like crypto being sullied a little bit, we definitely have been feeling the effects of that now with what's going on in the US. We're kind of following that closely. But I would say that there's a paradigm in which crypto, for me, comes back into the mainstream. And I think there's only really one conversational paradigm that works in favor of crypto, which is when you're talking about authoritarianism against individualism, and with the advent of central bank digital currencies and the potential that in the future that people will be more focused on the direct interaction that the government may have with all of their financial transactions, with a complete lack of believable privacy, let's say, and a frictionless experience of government intervention. I think that at least in the US, that may tip the conversation back towards a paradigm where crypto is seen in an alternate light. And of course, crypto can be many things and can exist in many different forms. There already is today regulated crypto in different forms. JP Morgan is handling billions of dollars of on-chain assets for a reason. It's not just altcoins and FTX. There's a diverse range of what crypto really means. So I think that to bring that back to the studio, and what we'll be working on to add on to what Jeremy was saying, I think we'll be watching to see what happens with the regulatory landscape and looking to put our oar in when it comes to creating startups that can lean onto the regulated but still free and liberated side of crypto. That's kind of that niche that we're going to look to explore in the future. Hopefully there's an opportunity to do so. And that would mean kind of continuing to use public blockchains, which is really where we're interested in right now.
Right.
So yeah, when it comes to the studio, just to bring it back to that, it was kind of moving quickly and bringing practices of innovation in. That was the
exactly.
I think we've got a real opportunity to bring in domain experts who just need an ecosystem around them to to bring a few ideas forward, test them quickly, and move forward with something that might work. And that's different from a lot of the founder experiences that are out there today. You obviously you have venture studios out there, but the vast majority of founder forward experiences are either accelerators or just kind of bootstrapping through to a VC round, often. And I think NoPody Studios has the opportunity to bring people in who just need those resources and a little bit of time, and shared resources as well as individual resources to test out some hypotheses and create a company. So yeah, I think that's really the magic, is bringing people who otherwise would not be part of the startup story into the frame. And that could be really exciting.
Yeah, one of the things that does excite me about the studio is that the traditional model of venture funding is, to my mind, quite broken, because it still relies on people outside of a fund having an idea, coming to the fund, more or less cap in hand, saying, please give me money to develop this idea. And the innovator, the inventor, the person who's had this, this concept and wants to take it to market, suddenly stops being an innovator, stops being an inventor, and starts becoming a business leader, starts becoming a fundraiser, starts becoming more or less an accountant or a finance person, rather than actually doing what they're great at doing. So I think bringing somebody into a studio enables, relieves them of some of that burden, because the studio can take up a lot of that work. But the other thing is, when we bring people into the studio like yourselves, there's an emergent property of having these people together. So it's not just that people come to the studio with ideas, but that ideas will be born within the studio, and they'll come from the fact that we have great people working together. And it's not just one idea; it'll be hundreds of ideas, which can then be spun off into new companies. And so that this word is greatly overused, but I think it's an important one in our context, which is it's a generative property. The studio is generating ideas. It's not just looking for ideas, people to come to the studio with ideas. We're looking to generate ideas within the studio. And I think having very, very close technical access, but also the business insight and the social insight from different people within the studio, including highly technical scenarios like yourselves, but also, as we've heard, with a very strong social innovation component, is pretty exciting. It's one of the things that I particularly enjoy in the studio.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, yeah, reading some of the book as well. Just curious to know, like, how are you looking at incorporating some of those experiments that you outlined in the book? Just to,
Oh, well, you said the magic word, the book. Yeah. So like every good chat show, I have a book to promote my book, Innovating, a short guide to making new things, which is available on Amazon and Kindle as well, of course. And thank you for mentioning that. It does feel like one of those traditional chat shows, with guests, or in this case, the host has a book to sell. So
Jeremy has some supplements to shill as well.
He's got some supplements, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Can contribute to my campaign while you're at it. But yeah, so one of the things I wanted to do in the book actually was look at, first of all, how do you actually generate ideas? What is the process of ideation? But I also spend the second half of the book talking about the way in which I do actually talk about venture studios and how venture studios are different from accelerators and incubators. But I'm really interested in the fact that innovation strategy, there's no one innovation strategy. Not like you can say this is how you innovate. It has to be tuned to the maturity of the business, to the maturity of the technical sector, the business sector, the maturity of the company that's working in there. And that requires different approaches. Sometimes the approach is very experimental. We're literally running experiments. Experiment being a process where you don't know the outcome. So we're not doing a validation at that point. We're actually experimenting to see if something is possible. And then, having experimented to see something is possible, then we've got the requirement to validate it and see if it's marketable, see if anybody actually wants this. And from there, you've got to build product and then do the alpha beta testing, which would validate, yes, this is possible, yes, people want it. Is this the way they want it? Is this a version of it that they would want to pick up? And so the process within the studio, especially if you want to move quickly, we have to get pretty agile at running those processes. One of the things I'm pretty excited about is building up the We sometimes call it the hive of people who will be able to contribute from all around the world. We talk about the studio being not just crowd sourced or crowd funded, but crowd infused, meaning that the crowd become a contributor to really everything we do in the studio, from ideation through to development through to testing, and that that aspect of it, I think, is actually very important for us. We're going to be highly distributed, and we already are highly distributed. Even as a young studio, we're highly distributed all around the world. We're highly distributed in time zones and technologies and techniques that we bring, and we're already starting to see some of that kind of emergent property. We're running experiments. Some of the experiments are really pretty cool. We're pushing NewCos through. So yeah, I think it's an exciting process, and it's a process which is already proving its value. I was wanting to ask you guys, as sort of relatively new members of the studio, we've got a few minutes left. If somebody was out there watching this who's got an idea, got thoughts that they want to develop, how would you suggest to them, sort of taking it further or kind of getting involved? You got any thoughts on that process?
With Nobody Studios?
Yeah, with the studio, or even people who want to develop ideas on their own and then maybe bring it to the studio later. As innovators who came from outside the technology space, do you have any advice for people? I think is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I'm actually working with a couple of people right now who I don't know if they are watching, but who are doing exactly that, and I'm trying to coach them through their innovative process, I guess, and to get it to a point where they can bring it to the studio. And so I guess I'll say the same advice, which is a lot of what is out there for the kind of YC style startup founder is good to a point. As much as it sharpens your mind, it focuses you in on what is a successful company. It may not do the best job at making you into, I think what you called in the book, was it not like an artisan rather than kind of a hyper-futurist innovator. But if you are looking to kind of develop something that will become a vertical SaaS platform, for example, then there's no harm in following a lot of those lessons that kind of the YC crowd have laid out there. But at a certain stage, before you go all the way, you should bring the concept, bring the problem solution opportunity to the studio and see if there's a way of building that out within the studio ecosystem, so that you can have the flexibility and the pragmatism to continue to pivot in an experimental environment before you are exposed to the wider investment environment. And that might be the right model for more of an investor co-founder. I'm sorry, not an investor, for more of an innovator co-founder than a fundraiser co-founder. If you don't feel that fundraising is what you really want to spend the next 5 years of your life doing, if you're the potential CEO of a startup, then I would say the studio is a really good direction to look in once you've got that opportunity solution pain point really targeted.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's an excellent approach. Jeremy, you got any thoughts?
One reason I was interested in sort of linking up with the studio and what a sort of studio environment provides is like tight fail cycles. So like the experiments and a certain amount of like sort of safety and failure, because I know that, I guess for everyone out there who's even interested in getting into tech, one of the hardest things when I've taught people how to code or get interested in tech is the fact that it's almost like my toddler's learning 2 languages at the same time right now, but he's very, very comfortable, like psychologically comfortable with failing. So he'll like go between German and English, and just he doesn't care. He'll just keep trying. And I think that's like the hardest thing to do, is just being willing to fail, because it's not really failing. You're really learning the next thing. And that's something that's been really fun in the studio, is working with people where the idea is the experiment and to fail, and that kind of goes throughout your whole sort of tech journey. Is you kind of have to continue with that sort of toddler approach of just like, I'm just going to do this over and over. I'm going to jump off a higher and higher thing and see what sort of happens.
That's a great observation. You know, it always strikes me that a lot of business development and ideation and innovation is actually it's far too linear and far too regular. You know, you try something, you fail, and then you go on and do something else. You know, well, I think your example of the toddler is great. You know, I would call that interactive failure. They never actually completely fail. They get something wrong and are corrected, and they come back and try again. And it's a constant process. It's not a there's not these barriers, these gates that they have to pass through in order to get themselves understood. They just keep going until they are understood. And I think sometimes, for traditionally for good reasons, you know, reasons of funding, reasons of progress reporting, and so on, that people create these artificial kind of gates and barriers that have to be passed through, rather than it being a continuous process of back and forward until we get it right. And hopefully, in the studio, we can do more of that. Our time is up, gentlemen. This has been fascinating from the first moment. Thank you very much for being taking part in this, and I hope we can chat again soon, and maybe we'll all get to meet each other at some point in the future.
I'm going to his wedding in a few months, so we'll meet there hopefully.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.